Hello everyone and welcome to your guide to popular builds and Heroes of the Storm. My name is Saren Death and today we'll be checking out Xul's Skeleton build. But before we get into any of that, a quick disclaimer. These guides are not written in stone. They are here to point you in the right direction, but ultimately they are a tool to help you learn the hero on your own. Now we've gotten through that, let's take a look at Xul. He is a melee specialist from the Diablo universe, and when he isn't collecting ears on Sanctuary, he is trying to maintain the balance of life and death in the Nexus by taking down heroes and raising their minions as his own. His kit allows him to be a very powerful pusher that also brings damage and control to a team fight. Before we get into his talent build, let's take a look at his skills. His trait is called Xul Skeleton. This raises a skeletal warrior whenever a nearby enemy minion dies. The skeleton will then perform an attack move action down the lane, helping push or beat down enemy heroes. The skeletons can last for 15 seconds, but they have a health pool and are relatively easy to kill. Xul can have up to 4 skeleton buddies active at once. This is a very powerful pushing tool that allows you to quickly drain an enemy's towers and push lanes in your favor. Also a quick note. You do not need to kill the minion for it to be raised as a skeleton. You just need to be in the area, which makes this trait even more powerful. Nothing like helping to push a lane as you move from one lane to another. Xul's Q is called Spectral Scythe. This is an 8-second cooldown, reverse skill shot that creates a scythe that travels back to your current location after a 1-second delay, dealing a fair amount of damage to enemies it passes through. Enemies can see the scythe being created, so they have time to move and dodge out of the way, but with proper positioning and movement, you can still hit them. This is a fantastic poke ability that can help clear waves, stall out objectives, or put out a sizable amount of damage during team fights. His W is called Cursed Strikes. This is a 15-second cooldown that empowers your basic attacks so they deal damage in a wide arc in front of you, reducing the attack speed of enemy heroes and summons by 40%. For 2 seconds. The Cursed Strikes buff will last 4 seconds once triggered, meaning that the buff will stay on you until you make your first basic attack, then the 4-second countdown begins. This is an amazing tool that allows you to counter melee heroes and auto attack heroes, and if you need to clear a merc camp quick or push a lane fast, you can activate this ability to get some very nice frontal cleave damage in. Just remember that mercs, minions, and bosses will not be affected by the attack speed slow. His E is called Bone Prison. This is a 12-second cooldown that places the targeted enemy in a bone prison for 2 seconds after a 2-second delay. This is a very powerful point-and-click lockdown tool that can allow your team to capitalize on an overextended enemy or allow you to escape from a hairy situation. Both allies and enemies will know who is being rooted, as once you have targeted someone with the root, a graphic will appear under their feet, giving them a chance to get away or your team a chance of winding up the rest of the CCs. Right out of the gate, Xul has access to another ability, defaulted to his 1 key. This is Bone Armor. It's a 30-second cooldown that shields Xul for 25% of his maximum health for 3 seconds. This is a pretty powerful defensive cooldown that allows Xul to engage the enemy or give his healers a chance to top him off after taking a sizable amount of damage. Also, his first talent tier will augment this ability to further fit the needs of the match. Now we've covered his basic abilities, let's take a quick look at his heroics. His first heroic is called Poison Nova. This is a 90-second cooldown that after a short delay fires off poisonous missiles that deal massive damage to all enemies hit over 10 seconds. The missiles travel in a straight line from Xul, creating wider gaps the further out they go, making it easier to dodge the further out they travel. This is a strong heroic that can really put out a lot of damage on enemies hit by the missiles. Just remember it is poison damage, so enemy heroes can minimize the damage with healing and defensive cooldowns. His second heroic is called Skeletal Mages. This is a 70-second cooldown that summons a line of 4 Frost Mages that deal moderate damage to nearby enemies, prioritizing enemy heroes, and slows them by 30% for 2 seconds. The Frost Mages can last up to 15 seconds. They do not body block, and they can be killed if focused down. This is a fairly strong control heroic that can help your team engage, disengage, or even chase down retreating enemies, and it has the added benefit of doing some damage. Just keep in mind that there are some nuances of using this heroic, like not being able to create all 4 Frost Mages if the area doesn't have enough room for them. Now we've covered his base abilities, let's lock down the talents. At level 1, you're going to choose the talent that will enhance your bone armor. Which talent you choose really comes down to personal preference and the makeup of the enemy team. If the enemy team has a lot of auto attackers, then you will likely go with Shade. This allows you to evade all basic attacks while bone armor is active. However, it does increase the cooldown of bone armor by 10 seconds. This means that your shield has the potential of lasting its full duration. If the enemy team doesn't have a lot of auto attackers, or you just want to dish out some more damage, then you will go with Backlash. This does damage equal to 15% of nearby enemy heroes' max health when Bone Shield expires. This has the potential of chunking enemies and pairs very well with Bone Prison. Really though, most enemies will see the graphic and attempt to get away from you, giving you even more of an opportunity to escape if used defensively. At level 4, you once again have a choice to make, which really comes down to personal preference. Your first choice is Jailers, which spawns 2 skeletal warriors when Bone Prison hits an enemy that then fixate on that enemy for 15 seconds. This is a great tool for dealing some additional damage to enemies hit by your Bone Prison and can be really effective in lane, especially when you consider that the Jailers do not count toward your skeleton total. Your other option is Trigul's Essence, which simply gives you 8 mana when you raise a skeletal warrior. This can be a very useful talent to pick up, allowing you to have a steady flow of mana for those long pushes. At level 7, you're going to go with Rathma's Blessing. This is another self-sustain tool that heals you for a small amount whenever you raise a skeletal warrior. This will allow you to stay out in lane longer, continuing to push, and then move directly into a team fight with little to no health missing. This talent is especially powerful in maps that Xul does exceptionally well on, like Tomb of the Spider Queen and Infernal Shrines, because the location of the objectives are so close to lane, but more about that later. When it comes to Xul's heroics, both are good choices. Which heroic you choose really comes down to personal preference and how you plan on playing Xul. If you want to help your team by controlling the battlefield, then Skeletal Mages is the heroic for you. It is a great zoning tool with a very long range that can help slow enemies and does some decent damage over their duration. If you want to help your team by putting out a large amount of damage, then Poison Nova is what you'll go with. The amount of damage this heroic does against dive comps especially can be staggering and may make your opponent think twice before jumping in on your team. At level 13, you again have a choice to make. In most instances, you will go with Corpse Explosion. This makes your skeletal warriors explode for light damage in a small area around them whenever they die. This deals 100% more damage to non-heroic enemies. This just further helps Xul push lanes that much harder and allows him to push down structures faster. Your other option is Giant's Curse, which makes your cursed strikes deal an additional 2% of enemies' max health as damage. This is a great talent to pick up if the enemy team is running a double tank setup or they have a bunch of high health heroes on their team. This is also a great counter to Cho'Gall. At level 16, you're going to go with Skeleton Mastery. This raises the number of skeletal warriors you can have up to 6 and increases their damage by 50%. That means more push and more healing from clearing a wave. Just a quick note about this talent here. You could go with Amplified Damage, which makes the target of your Bone Prison vulnerable for 2 seconds, taking 25% more damage, and should not be overlooked if you're having trouble taking down high-value targets. At level 20, Xul has a lot of decent talents to choose from. That being said, I personally think that Bone Spear is going to be your go-to choice in nearly all instances. This gives you a new skill shot on a 10-second cooldown that throws out a spear, dealing decent damage in a straight line. This is essentially another basic ability at level 20 and is very difficult to pass up. If you were looking for a little more control and you went with Skeletal Mages as your heroic, then you may want to go with Raised Mage. This creates a Frost Mage at a nearby enemy hero's corpse when they die, and increases the slow of Frost Mages from 30% to 50%. Really, you'd be picking this talent up for the increased slow. The additional Frost Mages are just a nice added bonus. If you went with Poison Nova and you were looking at getting a bit more damage with the Heroic, then you may want to go with Call of the Grave. This makes Poison Nova deal an additional 1% of the target's maximum life as damage every second, and since Poison Nova lasts 10 seconds, it essentially does 10% of their life as bonus damage over its duration. This can be really great if the enemy team has a lot of high health heroes on their team. Just remember, it isn't burst damage. Xul Skeleton build is a very strong build that makes him an exceptional laner with very powerful wave clear, heavy lane pressure, and great sustain in lane. He has OK poke, allowing him to deal some damage to enemies in lane and stall objectives with point and click lockdown. However, he has no real escape. His sustain suffers greatly outside of lane, and he is very squishy when bone armor is down. Alright, now that we've covered all of that, let's go over some quick tips for Xul. Always keep in mind that Spectral Scythe returns to your current location, so you can curve it to hit enemies that try and dodge it. I know that Poison Nova is a very tempting tool to start an engagement with, however it can put you in a very dangerous situation, so be patient and wait for the fight to start before moving in and catching your enemies off guard with its damage. This build for Xul excels on maps like Tomb of the Spider Queen, Infernal Shrines, and Dragonshire because the objectives are so close to lane, and allows Xul to make the most out of his kit by dipping back into lane to get some health back and by pushing the lane just by being near it, which grants vision and pressure. The arc for Cursed Strikes can pass through walls, so if an enemy looks like they're going to get away with just a sliver of health, or they just got behind their wall after you've thrown Bone Prison on them, you can activate Cursed Strikes to get free damage on them or finish them off. Just don't take unnecessary damage from the towers. Remember, you don't need to kill the enemy to win the lane. And Bone Prison's 2-second delay and graphic can give healers and other heroes ample time to respond to the root, so make sure you keep track of enemy defensive cooldowns like Cleanse, Iron Skin, and Shields so you know who to throw your roots on to get the most out of them. Thank you so much for watching. I hope that you found this guide helpful. If you have any variations or tips for this build, feel free to share them in the comments below. Thanks again for watching, and until next time, I will catch you all later.